Hello everybody, it is great to be back. It is 7 o'clock here in the UK. Welcome wherever you're watching us around the world. Let's crack on. A rebellion brewing over foreign aid cuts. Does the Prime Minister face defeat? We'll ask one of his own MPs, David Davis, who's joined that rebellion, as well as the shadow Foreign Secretary Lisa Nandy, and from the government today, Solicitor General, that's Lucy Fraser. Plus, we'll speak to the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown about COVID and the G7. Also for you this morning. Here we go. 1 year on from the toppling of that statue in Bristol, we'll get the reflections of the city's mayor. That's Marvin Rees. That's at 8:30 for you on the programme this morning. And Lucy's Law, close to my heart, the possible new measures to tackle exploitative imports of puppies into the UK. We're joined by the TV vet Mark Abraham at 8:45. It's Monday, the 7th of June. Tory rebels ramp up the pressure on the PM as they push for a Commons vote to overturn the reduction of foreign aid spending. Swipe right if you've been jabbed. How leading dating apps have teamed up with the government to encourage people to get their COVID vaccine. Big lockdown easing in Ireland and Wales today, but questions continue in England about whether the 21st of June will in fact be Freedom Day. Michaela Cole wins big at the TV Bafta Awards for I May Destroy You, calling on the industry to help end abuse of power.
And plenty of dry, sunny and warm weather once again for today, but there will be some sharp showers too. I'll have the details for you later.
Good morning. We start with a potential problem for the Prime Minister, who is under pressure from a group of around 30 Conservative MPs who could today force a vote to reverse his planned reduction in foreign aid spending. Rebels say the reduction will lead to hundreds of thousands of preventable deaths worldwide. My trusty wingwoman, Tamara Cohen, is here. Hi.
Hi, Kay.
Tell us more.
Well, it looks like Boris Johnson may have a major revolt on his hands. A lot of Conservative MPs felt very strongly that not only was the aid cut last year going to be devastating in terms of the impact and lives lost in poor countries, but also that this shouldn't have been done without a vote in Parliament, which was done because the government insisted it was only going to be temporary during the pandemic. But now those Tories have spotted an opportunity to amend a law that's going through Parliament at the moment to do with setting up a scientific research agency, but they found a way to try and force the government to use some of that money to reinstate the aid target if they won't do it any other way. Now, I understand Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, was himself calling Tories over the weekend to try and talk them down because they're so confident that they have the numbers. All we need to see is whether that vote will be allowed by the Commons Speaker to go ahead. And the supporters of it say the stakes couldn't be higher. This is my report.
In fragile states like South Sudan, cuts to foreign aid are already being felt. Sky News recently witnessed how a devastating combination of conflict, climate change and now the COVID pandemic have left millions of people at risk of famine.
What this tells us is really these are hotspots where people are going to die. 2/3 of people in South Sudan are food insecure, and yet the UK has cut its aid there by 1/3. And somewhere like Yemen, the world's worst humanitarian catastrophe, cuts to UK aid has stood at 60%. It's the worst possible time for the UK to be cutting back its support.
How bad is it looking, Chancellor?
The Chancellor announced the cut last November, saying the crisis at home had to come first.
Sticking rigidly to spending 0.7% of our national income on overseas aid is difficult to justify to the British people.
But today, a group of Conservative MPs who are determined to overturn that decision will join with Labour and others to push for a vote in Parliament, and they believe they have the support to force Boris Johnson's hand.
We're trying to train them right through to making the coffee till it's...
This tiny charity, with just 2 staff helping farmers in Nepal, spent months applying for a government grant and got through, only to be told it was scrapped.
Those communities, they're already struggling. We have a situation where we have to talk to our NGO partners to say, I'm sorry, this funding doesn't exist anymore. It's quite embarrassing, as a British citizen for that to happen. And, what does that do to the UK's reputation, I guess, overseas?
The government is still spending £10 billion on global health and poverty this year, and many Conservative MPs say there's plenty to be proud of.
98% of all of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is going to be going abroad to all of these countries which we're talking about now. That's been funded by, largely by UK government research money, which isn't included in our international development aid spending. So I think there's, we are putting a huge amount into supporting the world still now. And obviously at the moment, we've got real issues here in the UK.
Back in South Sudan, where UK funding for health clinics has been cut, those on the ground say many lives are dependent on these decisions. Tamara Cohen, Sky News.
Lucky to have Lucy Fraser with us now. She's the Solicitor General for England and Wales. Hello, thanks for joining us this morning. Let's start with foreign aid. There's lots to crack on with. I was listening to Bob Geldof yesterday on the telly, and he was saying Tory voters, quoting him, are essentially prudent, but they're not cruel. This cut is cruel. Why do you think it isn't?
Well, last year, we were the third largest donor globally in terms of international aid. So we really do pay a significant amount to help the world generally. And even without the 0.7% this year, we will be investing £10 billion. And that is really important. But we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it is really important that we support the effort here as well. The Treasury has spent £407 billion. So what we've said is, of course, international aid needs to be spent, but we're going to temporarily cease the 0.7% and bring it back when fiscal circumstances allow.
It is a global pandemic, of course, though. G7 in Cornwall this weekend, all the other G7 countries are not cutting their aid, so why are we?
It is a global pandemic, and we have very much contributed to that effort. So £500 million very early on to support the COVAX scheme. But not just that, it's because of the effort that we put in, the money that we put in to the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Let's talk about vaccines later on. It is a global pandemic. The other G7 leaders are all continuing to pay. We are not. It's going to be very embarrassing for the Prime Minister if he doesn't win this vote when he goes down to the G7 leaders, and he's the only one sitting there saying, oh, sorry, we can't do as much as we used to.
Our starting point is that we are one of the most significant donors to international aid. So as I mentioned, we are the third largest in terms of donors internationally. So our starting point is very high, and we absolutely think that is important, but we have to consider the circumstances that we're in.
But it affects the whole world. The other G7 leaders, I'll put the point again, are not cutting their aid. One could argue that other countries around the world, sub-Saharan Africa and the like, where they need a lot of money from us, they never more so than now. And yet we're saying, sorry, we can't do that for now. Charity starts at home.
We were one of the first countries to commit to the 0.7%.
So why get rid of that?
Well, our international effort isn't just about giving money through international aid. So I've mentioned the vaccine, but it's not just that. It's also about Boris Johnson's leadership, where he's said already in relation to the vaccine that we must ensure that the whole world gets the vaccine by the end of 2022. And we're
going to give that away, are we, as opposed to giving it away at cost?
We've committed to 100 million doses.
At cost or giving it away?
Well, we've committed to £2 billion worth of jabs over the course of this year and next.
Are we giving it away, or are we giving it away at cost?
Well, we've committed to £2 billion worth of jabs, and I'm not sure whether that is at cost or whether that is in relation to the jabs that will go out.
My understanding is that it's at cost and not for free.
Can I just come in on that point? Because it is really important to say the reason that the whole world and developing countries are getting it at cost is because of our investment as a country into the AstraZeneca vaccine in the first place. So that's a massive effort that we've put in already.
Is it true that the Chancellor's been he's so worried about potentially losing this vote today, the amendment to the vote, that he's been ringing Conservative MPs over the weekend?
I don't know what the Chancellor's been doing or hasn't been doing. The Chancellor hasn't rang me, but when there's any...
He can count on your vote, I'm guessing.
Well, he can count on my vote in relation to this matter, because I think it is really important that we spend money at home at this time of the pandemic. But it is usual, of course, for ministers to take the temperature of backbenchers and to talk to them to understand their concerns.
Talking about taking temperatures, there'll be a lot of that going on at schools today as the kids go back. A lot of them, I heard Mr Hancock say yesterday, should have had their lateral flow test before they went back to school. The way to get around that is for the kids to have their vaccines, 12 to 15-year-olds. When's that going to be?
Well, the position that we're in at the moment is that the medicine regulator has determined that it is safe and effective for children to use the vaccine, and that's great news. And the next step is that the government has already asked the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunisations to advise us on whether we should have a national rollout of the vaccine for 12 to 17-year-olds.
Do you think it's a good idea?
Well, I await to see what the JCVI say. We have taken their advice throughout the pandemic, and I'm sure we will take their advice on this as well.
Freedom Day, 21st of June. Is that going ahead?
Well, we will be looking at the data, and it is really important to look at the data before we make a decision. And the data that we'll be looking at is, the vaccination rate, the hospitalisation rate, the death rate, as well as the number of variants that we have in the country at the time.
Listening to Matt Hancock yesterday, it sounded as though it's less likely than it was.
Well, we'll look at the data, and there's a week to go before we'll be making a determination about June the 21st. So what the data is showing us at the moment is that the level of infections are going up, but that isn't translating into hospitalisations in the way that it did in the other waves. So that's good news, but we have to keep looking at the data.
You do look at the data, but we always know that it's the politicians that make the decision in the long run, and there's all sorts of considerations that you have to make, not least those pesky rebel MPs on your backbenches who will not be at all happy if you push this Freedom Day back any further. I suppose the Prime Minister has to take all of that into account as well, does he?
Well, the Prime Minister has to look at the data in relation to the situation on the ground in terms of health. That's hospitalisations, the vaccine rollout, all the other things I mentioned, but it also has to look at the economy
and the politics of
it, and the impact on business and on people's lives. I'm sure that the Prime Minister will be listening to backbenchers, as he will be listening to a variety of people, but really these decisions will be made on relation to the data.
Two other questions, if I may. As far as President Biden is concerned, he's coming down to the G7 in Cornwall on Friday, Saturday. He has said that unless the deal for Northern Ireland, as far as Brexit is concerned, is sorted out, it's an absolute mess at the moment. In fact, we heard from the Brexit minister saying that the government underestimated the effects of the Northern Ireland Protocol on goods movements, that there will not be a deal between the US and the UK on trade. How could you not have seen this coming? You were warned by three former prime ministers, and indeed George Mitchell, who put together the Northern Ireland Agreement, and the CBI as well. They all said, this is going to be a problem. Only now is the Brexit minister saying, looks like it's a bit of a problem. And the American president is saying, get it sorted.
Well, Lord Frost is absolutely trying to get it sorted, and he was in Ireland last week doing exactly that. It is very difficult on the ground in terms of trade, it is important that we ensure that we do have trade between the UK and Ireland, between England and Ireland, and it is really important that we saw that, and Lord Frost is doing exactly that.
But you understand that it does look as though you underestimated the complexities of this agreement.
Well, as it has panned out on the ground, it is more difficult than we anticipated, and we do need to sort out that trade arrangement, and that is what Lord Frost is doing.
So you weren't really listening when three former Prime Ministers, George Mitchell and the CBI, amongst others, were saying this isn't going to work?
I think we've listened the whole way through, but we have untangling our relationship with Europe, which we had for over 40 years, was obviously going to be difficult.
It was an oven-ready deal.
It was always going to be difficult, and no one underestimated the problems in relation to that, and we need to sort them out.
OK. Just want to ask you about this dating app story that I've been reading about today. So apparently you are going to advertise on dating apps to get more people to have jabs. Is that right? Is it going to say something like mature male with sense of humour, all his own teeth, 2 good hips, looking for long strolls in the open air with potential life partner, must have 2 jabs?
Well, what we know, and the reason this is really important, is that 59% of people would prefer to date someone who'd been vaccinated. We know that the vaccine is having an effect. As I mentioned, it's breaking that chain between infections and hospitalisation. So getting your jab is really important. And if putting this on a dating app helps encourage that rollout, then that's a great thing.
You nearly smiled. I've been up since 4 o'clock this morning working on that gag. It's lovely to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Still to come on the programme for you this morning at 7:20. I'll be speaking to the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Lisa Nandy, about those proposed cuts to the UK's foreign aid budget. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown joins us at 7:30. He's adding his voice to calls for richer nations to pay to vaccinate the entire world against COVID-19. 20 to 10, staycation successes. We'll hear from one of the businesses that's seeing a steep rise in demand due to more holidays at home. I thought my dating app gag was reasonably funny. Apparently, you're swiping through a dating app. You may get more than just a potential love match, as the government is using them to encourage people to get a COVID jab. Our reporter, Milena, joining us now live from the newsroom. Hello to you, Milena. It's lovely to see you. I've been away for 6 months, so I've forgotten how to pronounce your surname, and I didn't want to mess it up. Remind me.
It's Veselinovic, but you said my first name perfectly, Kay. Now, let me tell you about these dating apps matching with the government. So from today, people will be able to display a badge saying if they've been vaccinated or they intend to do so, and in return, the dating apps will let them have a boost, which lets them stand out among potential matches. Take a listen to what some young people think about this idea.
It's not really any of anyone's business. Everyone should keep themselves, and I don't believe that you should have to display that information.
I don't think I'd want to go out with someone who refused the vaccine, I guess for a number of reasons. Anti-vaxxers is kind of a... And, if it said refused, I think that's quite would play a big factor in swiping.
So this is all based on trust. There's no way of really knowing if date's being vaccinated. So with anything dating related, it is a leap of faith.
Okay, thank you, Milena. Thank you. As questions continue in England over whether the 21st of June will in fact be Freedom Day, with a big easing of restrictions, Ireland's making a big shift back towards a more normal way of life today. And our Ireland correspondent Stephen Murphy is with us now in Dublin. Hello to you, Stephen. I think one of my Twitter followers told me yesterday that it's a public holiday in Ireland today. Is that right?
Yes, it's a bank holiday Monday, Kay, here in Ireland, and that's why it's so quiet here at the gym. Basically, here at Dartry Health Club, which is open for the first time today since December. This is one of the first classes. In fact, it is the first class. You can see they're wearing a silent disco technology. That's because we're in a residential area, and it's 7 o'clock on a bank holiday Monday, so they don't want booming music coming out. But these guys are among the first in the country to get back into a gym. From today, we will see the return of gyms, swimming pools. There's one inside here. Cinemas and theatres can reopen, and as well the one that many people will be looking forward to, the return of outdoor hospitality. So later on today we'll see all the pubs that have been shut since December reopening for outdoor hospitality, as well as restaurants as well. Of course, people will remember this happened back in December, and it led to a third wave of cases, a really bad third wave. So people will be very cautious and keeping an eye on the data. But certainly from this morning, it is really a big and quite an exciting day here in Ireland.
I'm guessing you must have already done your workout, which is why you're not working along with them.
I wouldn't fit into my gym gear, to be honest, after the last few months, Kay. I need to go shopping, I think.
Welcome to my world. It's good to see you, Stephen. Thank you. Also, a further easing of restrictions in Wales for you this morning. Under new rules, up to 30 people will now be able to meet in parks and gardens, while 3 households can meet indoors. Larger organised events, such as concerts and football matches, will resume for up to 4,000 people standing and 10,000 people if they're sat down. Looking at the latest coronavirus figures for the UK for you this morning, 5,341 new coronavirus cases have been reported in the most recent 24-hour period. 4 deaths were reported, which means the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test now stands at 127,840. Meanwhile, another 203,613 people have received their first vaccination, and 473,378 people have now received their second. It means that 40 million people in the UK have now received a first dose of a coronavirus vaccine. Time for a look at this morning's other main stories for you. And more than 30 people reported to have been killed after 2 express trains collided in southern Pakistan. It's thought more than 20 people are still trapped in the wreckage. The Prime Minister, Imran Khan, has expressed his concern over the incident and says he's ordering a comprehensive investigation into railway safety. The England bowler, Ollie Robinson, has been suspended from all international cricket pending the outcome of an investigation into racist and sexist tweets he posted as a teenager. He won't be available for selection for a second Test match against New Zealand later this week. The Islamic State West African Province militant group has said the leader of rival Nigerian militant group Islamic Boko Haram has died. Abu Bakr Shekau is believed to have self-detonated an explosive device while being pursued by Islamic State militants on the 18th of May. Back home, the big winner at last night's Bafta TV Awards was Michaela Coel for her abuse drama, I May Destroy You. And she used her acceptance speech to call on the industry to do more to stamp out the abuse of power. There was a win for Sky News too, yay, in the Best News Coverage category for Inside Idlib. Our entertainment correspondent Lucy Costa reports.
In the wake of the allegations against Noel Clarke, it was no surprise Michaela Coel, creator and star of I May Destroy You, the hit series about consent, who won both Best Actress and Best Miniseries, alluded to abuse when picking up her award, calling on the industry to make productions safer and thanking her own intimacy coordinator for doing just that.
Thank you for your existence in our industry, for making the space safe, for creating physical, emotional and professional boundaries so that we can make work about exploitation, loss of respect, about abuse of power, without being exploited or abused in the process.
BAFTA's virtual audience announcing the only award voted for by the public.
Can you see that?
Right. BAFTA goes to Britain's Got Talent.
Leaving what we thought we knew in tatters.
Diversity's Black Lives Matter-inspired dance routine on Britain's Got Talent, which prompted more than 30,000 complaints, took the prize. And following unprecedented change by BAFTA to improve diversity, originality and risk-taking was rewarded.
Thank you so much, Sky Arts, for being so brave and so pioneering, putting on British TV the first spoken word poetry show.
Sky News took Best News Coverage.
Somehow the elderly owner walks out alive.
Couldn't produce a programme like Inside Idlib without a huge group of talented, dedicated, passionate journalists, and we had those in bucket loads.
And along with the greatest TV moments of the year, there was a nod to the realities of working from home and a celebration of when things go wrong as well as right.
2 biscuits. Yes, you can have 2 biscuits.
Lucy Cotta, Sky News.
Welcome to St Mary's for our...
Let's return to our top story for you now. A group of Conservative Party MPs hope to force Boris Johnson to reverse cuts to the foreign aid budget in a vote this afternoon. Joining us from Wigan is the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Lisa Nandy. Hello to you, Ms Nandy. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Apparently the Chancellor's digging in, has been ringing rebels over the weekend, and he is determined that this 0.5% for foreign aid will stay in place.
I think the government is making a real mistake. They're about to go into the most important week for many, many months, the G7, which the UK is hosting, with a major plank of global Britain in tatters, and he could change his mind. He could reverse this. He could just admit that cutting global aid in the middle of a pandemic is the wrong thing to do. It's short-sighted. It's not in Britain's interests. And he could solve this very, very quickly. I think the rebels are keen to make sure that they stay together as a party. I think they want to see the G7 be a success. We certainly do. And so it would be in the Prime Minister's interest, it'd be in Britain's interest if they just admitted they got this one wrong and moved on and started focusing on the G7, which is really, really important, where we could reach a global agreement about how to tackle COVID-19.
And we'll come on to that. But it does appear that on the face of it, the opposition's out of step with public opinion. 60% of public, when asked, support what the government is doing. In other words, saying charity starts at home. We haven't got the money at the moment.
But that's the point. 0.7% of GNI is the reason that we formulated it like that when we were in government, and the reason why David Cameron's government and Theresa May's government backed that policy is because we spend what we can afford on foreign aid. So when the country is struggling, we spend less, and when the country is doing well, we spend more. So we spent 700 million less in 2020 than we did in 2019 for precisely that reason. And these are programmes that fund things like tackling COVID-19, they fund things like tackling climate change, they fund things like tackling ISIS. These are programmes that aren't just the right thing to do, they're also in Britain's interest as well.
We also fund countries like China that actually doesn't need our money.
Well, look, there are a number of programmes that fund countries like China and India, for example, trying to prevent tsunamis and natural disasters from taking place. And there's a lot of nonsense talked about what that money is for, but it's actually to try and forge better relationships, links with the Chinese people, with the Indian people. And Britain is renowned as a world leader in this. This is one of the things that gives us soft power and influence around the world. It's really important that we continue to fund programmes that make us stronger in the world, that give us more influence, that allow us to have a direct relationship with people in countries where we have serious disagreements with their governments, but where we want to support their efforts to advance democracy and the rule of law and human rights. And that's why there are so many Conservative MPs today saying to the government, look, you've got this wrong. And nobody wants to see us going into this week of all weeks, this historic week, with the Global Britain policy in tatters, with a major row on the government benches. It'd be far better if they just dropped this and said, we've got this one wrong and let's move on.
If that wasn't enough, he's also got to contend, Boris Johnson, with the leader of the free world, who's coming down to Cornwall for the G7 at the weekend. And he has said that, apparently, shot across the bows, unless you sort out this mess that is the border in the Irish Sea, if you will, then there ain't going to be no trade deal between the UK and the United States. How does the government get themselves out of this? What would Labour suggest?
Well, look, I mean, we've got to sort out the border in the Irish Sea, not because Joe Biden has told us to, but because it's the right thing to do. It's causing absolute havoc in Northern Ireland, and we've got a responsibility to get this right. The Prime Minister made promises to the people of Northern Ireland that just haven't been kept. I think the best way to resolve this really is through decent relationships, through investing in those relationships and through pragmatism. We need to make sure that we minimise any kind of border checks and disruption, and we can do that with goodwill on both sides. In the last few weeks, I've spoken to counterparts in many European countries. I think that goodwill would be forthcoming, but there's a feeling at the moment that the government is just missing in action on this, particularly the Prime Minister. Whenever there's been a need to resolve issues in Northern Ireland, it's been the British Prime Minister who has had to personally step forward and invest in making sure that that happens. Boris Johnson has created this problem and yet is nowhere to be seen. I think there's a real feeling of dismay about that, but he could turn that around if he were prepared to step up, convene an intergovernmental conference and get these negotiations back up and running.
What should he do about Freedom Day?
Well, look, I'm desperate for us to unlock, like many people around this country, particularly I'm sitting here in Wigan. We've been in almost continuous lockdown here for the last 14 months, but we've got a couple of weeks to go and we've got to get infection rates down. They're rising here, they're rising in Bolton, Blackburn, Bury. These are all areas that have asked the government for help and that help hasn't been forthcoming. He needs to get the vaccine rolled out as quickly as possible to all over 18s. He needs to listen to public health officials who are saying make it available to teenagers as well, because there's a real problem amongst young people, which is driving the spike in transmissions in areas like mine. If he does that, if he listens to the front line and if he puts those resources in place, if he closes the loopholes in the borders, particularly this amber list, which is confusing, dangerous, causing real problems, if he does that, then we may be able to unlock in a few weeks' time, and I desperately hope that we can.
My director, Ben, is very impressed with the way you frame your shot there, Ms Nandy, and if you've had enough of being an MP, you can come and work in our studio for us.
This is very exciting, Kate. I'm sitting in the loft at the moment because it's the only place that my 6-year-old can't get to, but I will bear this in mind for my immediate future.
Exactly. If you're going to be locked down, there's no better place than Wigan. It's good to talk to you, Lisa Nandy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tamara's with us, thoughts?
Well, Labour will be thrilled with a government defeat this afternoon if there is a vote and if it goes their way. Interesting point, though, you made about the polling. Opinion polls do show that the public think that we are in a dire financial situation here, and it's the right decision to cut back a bit. We're still spending £10 billion this year. So is this the victory that Labour want? I mean, they and the Conservative rebels would say, look, governments have to decide what the right thing to do is, even if it may not be the very popular thing. Sometimes it's the right thing. But I think the Prime Minister and the Chancellor will be very aware that the public, according to those polls anyway, are with them on this cut. But they may be forced into changing course. Have to say, though, if the vote happens and it doesn't go their way, and you have MPs having voted for a cut, that does leave them in a difficult situation going forward as well.
And just very quickly, the thought from the Government Minister on the Brexit issues.
Yes, Lord Frost, who negotiated Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, which created the situation in Northern Ireland, the border essentially in the Irish Sea, has now said today in an editorial in the Financial Times, we underestimated what a big problem that would be for businesses in terms of paperwork. That's quite a big admission. We remember Boris Johnson saying, anyone tells you to fill in a form, Northern Ireland businesses, you can throw it in the bin. Turns out that's not what happened. And the government minister there admitted it was more difficult on the ground than we thought. This is something that Lord Frost now wants the EU to back down on some of their requirements. This is going to be a very tricky one to resolve, and many will be saying to the government, we told you so.
All ahead of the G7 in Cornwall this weekend, tomorrow. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. You saw the weather with Naz a little bit earlier on. She gave you a little bit of a taste of what's coming up. She's with us with more detail now, looking fantastic in burnt orange, I'm going to call that, Naz. Good morning.
A bit of a sunshine colour because we are going to be seeing some good spells of sunshine for today, but there will be some sharp showers for some areas.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Plenty of fine weather around once again for today. Some good spells of sunshine, warmth as well. But into this afternoon, some sharp showers are going to be developing. In fact, already this morning, there are some showers scattered across parts of northern and eastern England. Over western parts of Ireland and Scotland, there's also some showery rain. Otherwise, it's a mainly dry and bright start, but it is quite murky still across southern counties of England and Wales and around some eastern parts of the UK as well. The murky conditions will mostly lift and clear, but I think around some eastern coastal areas and down towards the south coast of Kent, it's still quite murky and cool. But inland parts, seeing lots of sunshine developing into this afternoon, but at the same time there will be more showers, especially around northern and eastern parts of England, eastern areas of Scotland, particularly for the southeast of Scotland. Further west, though, mainly dry, except for Western Ireland, cloudy and damp there.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, calling for wealthier nations to do more to help to vaccinate the global population. Writing in the Mirror this morning, he says British people understand that no one is safe until everyone is safe, and that COVID-19 is not over anywhere until it is over everywhere. He joins us now. Hello to you, Mr. Brown. It's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning. What more do we need to do in the UK to help with that?
Well, it's pretty clear that we need to vaccinate the world. We're not safe until everybody's safe, as I said. And it's an act of self-interest. It's not just an act of charity. Because if the disease spreads and mutates and comes back into our country through India, Nepal or Africa, then we all suffer. So this is something that the world has got to do together. And that's why on Friday, when Boris Johnson meets the G7 in Cornwall, they've got the chance. The richest countries sitting around the table, they've got the chance to make a decision that will vaccinate the whole world by putting up the money that is necessary to pay for it and sharing the doses that are excess in the United Kingdom.
But isn't that what the British government is already doing? Aren't they putting forward 100 million doses and saying that they're hoping that the world will be vaccinated by the end of next year?
Yeah, that's not a plan. There are 10 billion vaccines that are needed. 100 million is 1%. Even if America does it and other countries do it, we're only scratching the surface. You've got to have a plan, Kay. You know that. Every family knows that. You've got to have a plan to underwrite the funding. Then you've got to get the manufacturing capacity ramped up. Then you've got to get it in a number of different continents, manufacturing plants like Africa. And then you can vaccinate the world. It needs a plan, not just a wing and a prayer and a few doses that are left over being handed over. That's a good thing, but it's not enough.
But these doses are already being manufactured, I should say, around the world, aren't they? Not least in places like India.
Yes, India, the Serum Institute, but there's not much being done in Africa. And so something's got to happen in Africa, which is 1 billion people, as you know. And then we've got to make sure that the whole world is covered. So you need to give the incentive, as we did in Britain. When we offered to pre-purchase vaccines, we got Britain covered. But we need to offer to pre-purchase vaccines for the whole world. And there's a mechanism for doing that. There's a thing called COVAX. It's an international fund. They will pre-order the vaccines if they have the money. And the money has got to be put on the table on Friday.
A dose per second in the developed world, I believe, is what's being administered at the moment, but less than 2% of the population in Africa has presently had their first dose of whichever vaccination is being offered. One of the other problems, though, is the population wanting to have these doses in the first place. So it is about communication too.
Yes, I think we've got to realise there are teething problems, getting the supply up and running. There are also distribution and logistics problems. And there's also this worry, particularly, of course, when the publicity from the French president about AstraZeneca was put around the world, that some vaccines are not safe enough. So we've got to get over these problems. But that can be done if we can convince the leaders in the country to mount not just a vaccine campaign, but a publicity campaign to explain the benefits of vaccination. You know, it is so important that children are vaccinated against polio and diphtheria and all these things, and that's at risk through these overseas aid cuts. But it's equally important that every adult is vaccinated as soon as possible. And the end of 2022 is not good enough. We've got to get it a bit quicker than that.
You mentioned the overseas aid cuts from 0.7% of GDP down to 0.5%. It is only temporary, according to the government, and we just can't afford to pay any more at this stage. It does appear that 60% of the British population agree with the government. So it's people like you, Lisa Nandy, and other opposition representatives who are out of step, not Rishi Sunak.
That's very interesting, Kay, but there's a poll this morning which says something quite different. That 79% of the British people, when asked about their preference, want Britain to pay its fair share of vaccinating the world, and only 21% are against. So when it comes to vaccines and people realise the benefit for the whole world, but particularly also the benefit to Britain, people actually, 79% want us to pay our fair share. So I think you've got to look at these overseas aid cuts and think, if you're pulling away the vaccine or the injection needle from children and adults who need vaccinated and putting their lives at risk, then that's not a good thing, and there is not public support for that. And on Friday at the G7, we will decide effectively who lives and who dies, who is to be vaccinated and is therefore safe, and who is not to be vaccinated and therefore is at risk.
How are you feeling about vaccinations for kids in the UK? I can't remember how old your children are now. They're always toddlers when I think about them. But are you happy for them to have their vaccinations?
Yes, of course, and they're teenagers. And if the medical advice is that the teenagers and young children have got to be vaccinated, then we should do so. But I do say there is enough potential for producing vaccine around the world. So you don't have to make a choice between vaccinating the 12-year-old and vaccinating older people and nurses and health workers in other countries. We've got to be able to do both. And that's the importance of having a plan. And I've set out a plan. Norway and South Africa have put this plan forward as well, that the G7 can make sure that everybody is vaccinated by making a decision on Friday. Not just hoping through dose sharing, but funding it to make sure it actually happens. And I don't think there's a family in this country who will say that children and adults in other countries who need it should not have vaccines.
But let me just talk about families in this country, if I may. You and Sarah are very happy for your children to have their vaccinations. What would you say to other parents listening this morning, taking their kids off to school, thinking, it's OK for me to have the double jab, but I'm not sure it's proven, this vaccine, yet for my youngster?
Well, I said medical advice. If the medical advice is that we should have it, then I will accept the medical advice. And I think the Prime Minister and the government ministers will do so. And if the advice is given in such a way that it reassures people, then I think most parents who get their children vaccinated for other things, for tuberculosis, for polio, for diphtheria, all these vaccinations, parents are prepared to do that for the children, meningitis as well, then we should make sure it happens. It's really a question of following the best medical advice we have.
And a quick thought before I let you go, as far as politics is concerned, the Brexit minister writing in the Financial Times this morning and saying, it's a bit harder than they thought it was going to be, this border in the North Sea, the Irish Sea, I should say. What would you say in response?
Well, we're going to be paying the price for many years to come because our trade is affected. Imports and exports are affected. Northern Ireland is particularly affected. And I really hope the government can sort out some of these problems as quickly as possible because it's about jobs, it's about livelihoods, it's about the supply of food and everything else. It's got to be sorted out.
21st of June, Freedom Day. Are you all in favour?
Well, everybody wants all the restrictions to end, but we've got to do it on the basis of medical advice. I mean, I think we've listened to the very senior health advisors throughout this crisis, and we should continue to listen to them. And there will be an end to this if we do the right things.
OK, always a pleasure to talk to you, Mr Brown. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme this morning. Thank you. Let's put that to Sir David King, should we? He's the former Chief Scientific Advisor and Chair of the Independent SAGE Group. Hello to you. Just heard what the former Prime Minister had to say then. If not the 21st, then when?
Well, I think first of all, Kate, what I want to do is take you through some numbers. Today, we've had announced 5,300 cases per day, new cases of the disease per day in the United Kingdom. And last week, comparison means we're up about 2,000 on last week. Now, we've been discussing whether or not we're going into a serious third wave, and I don't think we can possibly wait any longer. This is the evidence of another wave appearing, and the reason is quite complex. It is, yes, the vaccination program is working extremely well and everyone supports it. Why we haven't ramped up production so that we can meet our demand and international demand is an issue that we need to discuss, because certainly we could have had that capacity built up. But what I do think is important is that we know that anyone vaccinated twice is relatively safe against the virus. But let's not forget that the 1 in 25 new cases are people who have been vaccinated twice. That means 400 new cases a day are people who have had the vaccine twice. So I just want to say, while there is an extensive amount of virus out there in the country amongst our people, it is dangerous. And
sorry to interrupt you, Sir David, but the government would say in response to that, yes, you potentially could get COVID, even though you've had 2 vaccinations, but the likelihood of you dying as a result of that is infinitesimal?
Well, we don't yet know that. We haven't had the Indian variety for long enough to be able to say it's infinitesimal. But what I would say is that dying isn't the sole issue that we're trying to avoid here. The number of people who are suffering from long COVID in the country is enormous. And so this is not simply a flu once you've had the vaccine. I don't think we can underestimate the importance of this disease. And of course, we know that it's spreading rapidly amongst children who haven't been vaccinated. And you've just been saying to Gordon Brown, would you have your children vaccinated? Actually, the Pfizer vaccine has already been given the green light in this country to over 12-year-olds. I think we should run that program forward quickly. But you see, we're opening schools today, and the government has said 12 to 18-year-olds no longer need to wear masks, face masks at school. I don't think that was a wise thing to do, and I do hope the government would rethink this in the light of the current figures. Let me just say about the number of people in our hospitals, which the government says is relatively stable. Well, it's 932 per day going into hospital, which is up 65 from last week. It's not actually stable. It is slowly rising. So what all of this means is that intensive care is needed for a significant proportion of our population today. I do think I'm very reluctant to say that we should not go out of lockdown on the 21st of June. But I think the figures are in now, and it would be wise for the government to announce right away a delay in opening, just so that we can all plan for the post-21st of June period.
A delay for how long, Sir David?
I would give it a few weeks delay and see how the figures are emerging. So I don't know how long, as the Prime Minister has said, it's data, not dates, that we should be governed by. And that's my response to you as well. I wish I could predict, but everything depends now on how well the government manages this program. Frankly, we haven't managed it at all well. Today, why aren't we separating people who have the disease from those who don't? The find, test, trace, and supported isolate system that works so well in so many countries has simply not been up and running in this country. That is the way for us to get on with our business, manage the economy, and at the same time open up if we can separate those people from the rest of us. But of course, that has failed, and the government isn't even talking about trying to make this work. Why do we talk about testing at large scale if the purpose of the testing isn't to see that we isolate those who have the disease from those who don't?
A final thought, Sir David, before I let you go. I suppose the government would say, in response to the information that you're giving us today, they have to take into consideration not just COVID-19, but people that are dying from all sorts of other illnesses as well, and indeed the mental health of lots of people in the nation who really just cannot bear the thought of not being able to be released from lockdown on the 21st of June. What would you say in response to that?
Well, I think the first thing to say in response is that the economy is going to be better off if we open up quickly. But at the same time, if we open up too quickly, the economy will suffer. If I then look at the state of our hospitals, the number of people who are waiting for operations is larger than we have on record for a very, very long time. As soon as we can get this virus out of the country, then we can get the hospitals back up and running. But here again, surely there should be a campaign for the government to fund the NHS properly. There hasn't been a significant increase in funding to the National Health Services since this whole outbreak began. And I would say that, again, is a missing parameter. Since 2010, we have seen funding of NHS being cut back. That really needs to be recovered in order to manage all of the health issues in the country. Now, you're talking about people who are suffering mentally, and I do think that's absolutely right, from being in lockdown. And we are now in a semi-lockdown, and that is already helping. And I'm going out to dinner for the first time tonight. So we all want this new situation to arise. But I don't see the government doing nearly enough to manage this, and nor have I seen this since the beginning of this outbreak. Let me ask you, if I may, to ask the government, are they actually believing in herd immunity among school children? Is that why they're saying take masks off, so that the disease spreads rapidly and they all become immune by having had the disease? If that is a policy, shouldn't we be honest with the public and tell us that is the policy? I believe that herd immunity was the policy from the beginning back in February, March last year. So have we returned to that now with a high vaccination level? So I've got many, many questions to ask the government.
Well, I'll try and do that on your behalf next time I get the opportunity. It's good to talk to you. Hopefully a cheeky glass of wine with that dinner tonight as well. It's good to talk to you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. They'll be celebrating in California today because Harry and Meghan have announced the birth of a baby girl whose name pays tribute to her great-grandmother, the Queen, and her late grandmother, Princess Diana. We're joined now by the royal editor of the Sunday Times. That's Roy Onika. Hello to you, Roy. It's great to see you. Tell us about the significance of the name.
Good morning, Kay. Well, both names are hugely significant. And I think most of us royal watchers thought there might be Elizabeth in there. But Lilibet is that very intimate childhood nickname that only those closest to the Queen have used for her, of course, including the late Duke of Edinburgh. So I think the significance of choosing that name for their daughter's first name is, I think it shows that they're very keen to let the world know that despite the very turbulent year Harry and Meghan have had and the complaints they've made against the monarchy, there is still a very close bond and a close tie with Her Majesty the Queen.
So do you think that this is in some way trying to heal the rift or perceived rift between the couple, the other side of the United States, and Her Majesty and the other members of the royal family here?
It definitely feels like a symbolic move. Yes, I think every explosion that's come from across the pond over the last sort of 6 months to a year or so, the Queen has made a series of statements dating back to when they decided to leave to the most recent interview with Oprah. And every time she's made a statement, she has continued to say, Harry, Meghan and Archie remain much loved members of my family. And I think choosing this name, which everyone will recognise as being a very close personal name of the Queen's, is a sign from the couple that I think they want people to acknowledge that they still have that close bond and a lot of love and respect for the Queen, and that they are very much still part of the Windsor dynasty.
Isn't Harry supposed to be coming over to unveil a statue of his mum with his brother for her 60th birthday, I think 1st of July or thereabouts? Is that still going to happen, do you think?
Yes, I think my understanding is he is still due over here. So, of course, given the isolation things we need to do at the moment, I think we can expect to see him travel within the next few weeks. And he is due to unveil that statue, which William and Harry commissioned together 4 years ago when, of course, the relationship between the brothers and the royal family was very different. But, also giving their daughter Diana as her second name, it all feels quite close and close to home at the moment and quite personal. And I think that will be on everyone's minds when the two of them unveil that statue on July the 1st for what would have been her 60th at Kensington Palace.
Everybody will be looking at the body language between the boys when that happens. What do you know about their relationship at the moment?
It's still not great, is my understanding. I think despite that, both William and Harry know that moment is a huge global moment, and that moment has to be about their mother's memory. So in the same way they did for the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, I'm absolutely certain they will put any hurt and differences aside for that day to make sure that it goes off well and they honour their mother in the way that they wanted to with that statue. So I don't think we should expect to see any froideur or distance there, but there's no doubt that a lot of the media will be scrutinising every single movement they make at that unveiling.
And just back to baby Lilibet for a final comment. Will she get some sort of royal title or not?
She will, but not yet. And I suppose slightly poignant because she will get that title. She will get an HRH. She will be a princess, but only when the Queen is no longer monarch and when the Prince of Wales ascends to the throne. she and Archie will automatically be elevated to HRHs.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thank you. So there you go. The baby was born on Friday afternoon. We're told mum, baby and dad all doing well. What's happening as far as the weather is concerned today? As you can see, Naz is looking resplendent in burnt orange. Does that reflect on what the weather's going to be doing, Naz? Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. A bit of orange weather, well, sunshine is what I meant for today, but we are also going to see some showers.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Some good spells of sunshine will be developing for today. Again, it will be feeling warm as well, but there will be some sharp showers around. Currently, some showers are scattered across some northern and eastern parts of England, also western coast of Ireland and Scotland. Otherwise, it's a mainly dry and bright start, but there are some fairly murky conditions across southern parts of England and Wales and around eastern parts of the UK as well. And most of the murky conditions will burn away, so we will see some good spells of sunshine developing, particularly around inland areas for today, but around eastern parts of Scotland, the southeast of England as well, I think it will stay quite murky and cool, and there will be sharp showers for northern and eastern England and eastern parts of Scotland.